Alright, so during Ur Khan's time, this is the first time that the Muslims are able to cross over and occupy Byzantine territory. This is going to be the foothold that will be the beginning of all of the European conquest during the Ottoman time. And this is happening in the 14th century, the early 7th century of after the Hijrah. And here, later during that time, this is Ankara. They are also going to lay siege to Ankara. That's going to become part of the Ottoman Empire very soon. But as you can see, Constantinople is still part of which empire? The Byzantine Empire. That's the Byzantine Empire in orange. This is the city of Edirne, right? It's still there today. And the border with Greece is right there, like very close to Edirne. The Ottomans had to negotiate after World War II. Keeping this part here, that took a lot of negotiation after World War I. Alright? Because the Greeks basically wanted to take it back. They just wanted to leave the Turks with this here on the Asian side. That would have meant that if you go to Istanbul, just this area would have been part of Turkey and not these areas here. Right? Let's move on. This is, in fact, I have a better map that I want to show you. Where is it? No, I don't have a better map. I apologize. Alright, so here we have, this here is Hungary, that's Romania, that's Bosnia, this is Croatia, that's Serbia, Macedonia, Albania, that's Greece, and that's Bulgaria. So, and this is Moldova. So Moldova, Romania, Hungary, Slovenia, I'm not sure, I need to double check. But I don't think it was part of the Ottoman Empire. If it was, then I think it only paid tribute. Croatia, Bosnia, Albania, Macedonia, Bulgaria, and Greece. The whole of Greece was part of the Ottoman Empire. And this is part of our Islamic history that we don't spend a lot of time on. That these European countries, whether you call them Eastern European countries or Balkan states or whatever name you wish to give them, all of these areas were under direct and indirect control. If they were not being directly governed by the Ottomans, they were paying tribute to the Khalifa in Istanbul every year. Some of the princes on the border areas here, they had to pay 12,500 gold ducats every single year. That was just as a vassal. That's like a jizya, right? And this area here was also one of the main areas where foodstuffs would come into Istanbul. Istanbul's right over there. Walhamdulillah. Alright. This is also the Ukraine. And the reason why I have this picture here is I want to show you, this is the Crimea. You see this here? Alright. So this is what the Russians took from the Ukraine. That's the Ukraine over there. And that's Kiev. And that's Russia. So the Muslims, the Ottomans, they occupied the southern region over here. Write this down. There are just two groups I want to talk about. Number one are the Tartars, and the other group are the Cossacks. Right? The Tartars are Muslims, and they have been Muslims since the Mongol times, and these people were Christians, Orthodox. Right? They were both, what can we call them? A semi-nomadic people, like mostly cavalry on horseback, brave fighters. The Muslims would use the Tartars against the Ukrainians and the Polish and others, and the Russians would use the Cossacks. And if that name sounds familiar, it's because the Cossacks also fought in World War I and then again in World War II. They fought on the side of the Russians in these two world wars as well. And the Cossacks are also accused of a number of atrocities in both wars and even before that. Write this down also. The Ottomans and the Russians went to war at least 6 times, where one or the other declared war on each other. Right? So at least 6 times there was an official war between the empire, the Russian Empire and the Ottoman Empire. So it isn't hard to understand why after World War I, there was, let me put it this way. One of the reasons that saved the Ottoman Empire in World War I from being completely destroyed was what happened in 1917. Who can tell me what happened in 1917? Yes, the revolution in Russia and the fall of the Russian Empire, or the Tsar's Empire. And so that meant that Russian forces now started withdrawing from all of those areas in which they were, in the Black Sea and also in Turkey or the Ottoman Empire. And later the Ottomans would sign a treaty with the Bolsheviks or the Soviets. Right? So all of these things were happening. I'm starting to feel, what's the word? Overwhelmed. There's so much information to cover and we have not even gotten halfway. Alright, just make a note here, inshallah. So this is the Timurid Empire, right? And as you can see, the Mamluks are ruling here, North Africa, Egypt, and also the Hijaz and Syria. This is the Ottoman Empire at that time in 1405. I told you that Timur, he defeated Bayezid at the Battle of Ankara, and Bayezid then died a year later, or a few months later. So Timur controlled this entire area. His capital was here at Samarkand. And after that battle, what happened was that he was going to fight a civil war that was happening in this area. Like this is basically what is today Iran and Afghanistan. All right. So he left Turkey, and he took his forces with him. There was a lot of videos I wanted you to watch, but I decided that it would just take too much time from the 2 hours. So I'll just give you the YouTube channel. It's called Kings and Generals. You know, on YouTube when you go and then you go to the channel and then they have playlists. All right. So go to Kings and Generals, then go to the playlists, and then they have something called Ottoman Battles. It's really, really well done. They also have a lot of battles of early Islam, like Yarmouk and other battles. It's really good. Excellent graphics and stuff, subhanallah. And most of the videos are like, between 10 and 15 minutes long. You'll really enjoy it. Because when he does the Battle of Ankara, and also the siege and the fall of Constantinople, he has maps, he has like the graphics, he has where the troops are stationed, he shows the tactics that were employed on the battlefield. Because when Timur fought against the Ottomans at Ankara, he had lots of elephants with him. So he used the elephants, and then he in the middle, and he had both his cavalry flanks on the side, and that is one of the reasons why he won that battle. He was able to really position his forces well, and the Ottomans were no match for his army. Also remember, because he was a descendant of Genghis Khan, they were still following that Mongol blueprint for conquest, which, even though it was extremely bloody, it was extremely successful. Alright, so that's that. Inshallah, next month, I hope that I'll be able to go to Uzbekistan, and I will be doing a tour with Sheikh Yahya Ibrahim and a group of about 45 people. We will be going to Bukhara and Samarkand, and I'm looking forward to that. But after what happened with my Umrah trip, I am going to keep my expectations very low now. Okay? But khair, inshallah. Allah knows best. Alright. So that's the Battle of Ankara. We're not going to move and talk about that too much. Here are a few other issues that I want to talk about, like reconstitution. This was after 1415, and this is when Muhammad II comes to power. The conquest of Constantinople. Then there's the Habsburgs. Who are the Habsburgs? They are Austrians, okay, and their capital is Vienna, and they would also, for a time, they would have control over Italy. They would have control over Spain. They would have control over the Netherlands and Belgium and other German principalities. So, and then they would join the Kingdom of Hungary to their kingdom, and then from that point onwards, it would be known as the or the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. And that's the empire that enters World War I, because they declare war on Serbia, and then because they declare war on Serbia and attack Serbia, the Russians attack the Austrians, and then the Germans get involved. And because the Germans get involved and they invade Belgium to invade France, that's when the British get involved, and that's how World War I starts. It's an excellent YouTube channel, mashallah. Now we're giving you books and YouTube channels, mashallah. This is amazing. Anyway, there's an excellent YouTube channel. It took them a few years to do this. It's called The Great War, and they cover World War I week by week. So I'm not sure how many they did, but they cover so every episode starts, they will say, the guy will introduce the episode, and they will say, this week in the West this was happening, and in the East that was happening, and the Russians were doing this and the Germans were doing that, just that week. So if you watch that and you read a lot of books on World War I, you'd be an expert. You'd speak with some real knowledge and authority on the topic, because you have covered it with that detail. How many weeks in a year?
52.
So you have 1915, 1916, 1917. So that's 150, 160. My math is a bit fuzzy, yeah? And 156. Yeah? So you have at least, that's 156 episodes just there, and that's just the main part of the war, because the war started when? 1914. Alright, let me not do this anymore. Let's just move on. Alright, I want to talk about the conquest of Constantinople, because in my opinion, this is really the most amazing, and I believe, this is just my personal opinion, this is like the greatest feat that the Ottomans, ever did. This is just, because like I said last night, and on Monday also, so many empires had been trying to conquer that city, like from the earliest period, like from the 5th century, of the Christian era. But they just failed. And then for you to come 1,000 years later, and for you to do it after all of these failures, can you imagine what Muhammad II felt as he walked into the city? Can you imagine just that feeling of accomplishment, that feeling of, and this is what I think. As he walked in, I feel that he must have felt that an enormous weight was just lifted. Right? That's number one. Because the pressure from April until May, there was a time there where it wasn't going well. It looked like he would have to withdraw his forces and get the Byzantine emperor to pay like a tribute. And he said, no, we're going to do it. And then they did it. But so relief must have been the first emotion. The second emotion is just this, just an appreciation for what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him. And then the third is the anticipation of what it would mean. Like, I don't think he envisaged, at that time when he entered the city, what it was going to mean for the future. So there's all these things, subhanAllah. Anyway, he brought 100,000 soldiers. You'll find this information on that YouTube channel. He had 69 cannons. He had 126 ships. These are the things that he brought to bear on the city of Constantinople. In comparison, Constantine, I think it's Constantine the 11th or the 13th. You guys can double check, inshallah. He had 7,000 soldiers. Some of them were Genoese. He had 500 mercenaries. He had 15 cannons, and he only had 26 boats. So they were not prepared for this. They were hoping that the Venetians and that the Pope would send forces to come and relieve the city, which didn't really materialize. And so alhamdulillah, that was also something that was that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had decided. Anyway, there is a series that's available right now. I think it's on Netflix. It's called The Rise of the Ottoman Empire, the Siege of Constantinople, or the Fall of Constantinople. I saw the first or second episode, And what I noticed was that it's not really a series, but it's like a docu-series. So what that means is that there's a lot of cutaway from the live action to interviews with actual Ottoman historians. Some of them are Turkish, some of them are British, some of them are American. But I thought that gave it value, because you have people that are experts on the topic talking about the topic. Anyway, so we move on, inshallah ta'ala. Yeah, I showed you that this was the city. This wall was about 20 kilometers long. It basically runs from the Sea of Marmara to the Golden Horn. That's the Golden Horn there. This little outpost here belonged to the Genoese. This is the Sea of Marmara. There are sea walls here and alongside the Golden Horn. So the whole city is on this little peninsula here, and it's surrounded by walls on all sides. Let's talk about these walls here, because there are layers of walls, and then there's a steep incline and a moat, and then there's another wall, and then there's another area, and then there's another wall. So it's just not one wall that needs to be penetrated. And the Muslims lost thousands of soldiers trying to storm the walls every time they tried to do so. Until finally, on that last day, I think it's the 29th of May in 1453, this is when they were finally able to breach the city and take the city, walhamdulillah. Alright, this is an artist impression of what was happening on that day. And this is a replica in Turkey today of the cannon that initially was being used. This was the biggest cannon of its time at the time. And it didn't last very long. And it took 3 to 4 hours to fire a single shot, because the amount of explosive gunpowder that needed to go to shoot a cannonball out of this thing caused so much heat that they had to wait 3 to 4 hours before it cooled down enough so that they could reload it. But this thing was huge. There's a lot of stories about how many oxen were needed to carry this thing from where it was being produced, like in the European, in the Balkan area. But let's move on, inshaAllah ta'ala. Alright, this is a good book, but I read this book about two or 3 years ago. The author is not a Muslim, and he says a lot of things in the book. I'll give you 2 things so that you can be prepared. Number 1, he says in the book that Muhammad al-Fatih was bisexual. And he says in the book that Muhammad al-Fatih was a very superstitious person that dabbled in fortune telling and astrology, and he would slaughter animals, and those kinds of things are said. Where that information comes from, I can almost guarantee that it does not come from Ottoman sources or Muslim sources. You understand? Say again?
In the series that also you mentioned,
yes.
Some of the astrology did come out.
Yeah, it did come out. But that was also part of Abbasid court practice as well. Yeah. In later periods, they would have people like that, astrologers. Astrology was very popular.
So that's when they were saying that he was about to surrender.
Yes.
And then someone came, like Lady Mara, this time of the thing, and said that the lining of the stars.
Yes, and he says the same thing. In fact, in this book, he says that when he conquered the city, then he slaughtered a sheep, like in the walls of the foundations as they were rebuilding them. So stuff like that. But like I asked you earlier, let's assume for a moment that all of that is true. Does that cloud the entire enterprise? About
that great sultan, the great army.
So do we need to take that into consideration as well, right? So there's what I like about history and why I prefer it over fiction now is that we're talking about that which is real, things that one can relate to, things that are these are actual people. But anyway, like I said, this is a good book. All right, this is what is it? Is it the Blue Mosque? No. Hagia Sophia. When was the Hagia Sophia built? 537. Yes. Because this is a cathedral that the Muslims converted into a masjid, and now it's a museum. Allah musta'an. Anyway, this is the Topkapi Palace It is also massive. It was abandoned in the beginning of the 19th century for this thing. I call it the thing because that's basically, you want to look like it to look like a European palace. All right. But anyway, yeah, Afwan? Yeah, so this became the seat of the government and the palace for the Ottomans. But apparently the amount of gold that was used inside there is staggering. I can't remember the amounts now because I was listening to the lecture while I was driving. But the Sheikh was talking about the number, like in kilograms of gold that was used to decorate the inside of this palace. This is one of the reasons why they went into debt administration in the 19th century, because of the repayment of the debt to build this palace. Remember what we said last week on Thursday? What's one of the reasons for defeat? Luxury. All right. This is a graphic of the siege of Vienna. Like I said, the first one took place in 1529, and the second one in 1683. Both of them were unsuccessful, with a lot of the loss of life in the Muslim army was tremendous, right? And lots of people died on the way back because of illness, right? So, in fact, did you know that statistically, you were more likely to die of illness than die in war as a soldier? Like in pre-modern times, or even during like World War I. The soldiers who were dying in the trenches were mostly dying of disease instead of being shot or blown to death, like in explosions. All right, this is now just what I want to talk about now. This is just before the Ottomans go to war in World War I, and this is them fighting in Gallipoli. So I said earlier, why did the Ottomans ally themselves with the Germans? Like, why did they declare war on the Allies with the Germans? Because yes, they had that partnership with the Germans, but there was no military alliance with the Germans. They were not obligated to fight on behalf or with the Germans against the Germans' enemies. So why did they declare war on the Allies? It's a very, very complicated story. I'll just summarize it for you. And that is that they felt that the only way for the empire or for the state to survive was to two reasons actually. Number one, the British, the Russians, and the French had proven themselves extremely unreliable in the past. And the Germans had always shown, that commitment to Turkey or to the Ottomans before that. The second reason is that they thought that the Germans, of a necessity, would be the victor. So why not put your lot in with those that you believe are going to be successful, right? And then obviously there are other reasons, but I'll just give you those two for now. Obviously we know that the Germans lost, the Ottomans lost. And after this was basically a decision to partition the empire. This is the Safavid Empire. And as you can see, it goes all the way to Kandahar in Afghanistan and all the way here into Turkey. Here's Armenia, Azerbaijan, Kurdistan. So this is southern Turkey, northern Syria and Iraq. There's Baghdad, and they controlled this entire area. This is at their greatest expanse. This is during the time of Shah Abbas I. All right. Now, what do we know about them? So they came into power in 1501, and their empire ended in 1736. So they lasted for just under 240 years. The next thing is that they are named after Safiyyuddin. Ardabil is in northern Iran today. Ardabil. And Safiyyuddin was a Sufi Sunni sheikh. Write that down, please. He was a Sunni Sufi sheikh. He had his own tariqah, as they say, his own Sufi order. So they were originally a Sunni Sufi order that converted to Shi'ism. The person that converted them to Shi'ism is the first Sultan Shah Ismail. Shah Ismail in 1501. They basically adopt Shi'ism as the official madhab. And the period of persecution of Sunni ulama at this time is severe. This is also the time when they start bringing in ulama from Lebanon to come and teach Shi'ism and to be the ulama in the Safavid Empire. They were the main rival of the Ottoman Empire in the East and amongst the Muslims, if we consider the Shia to be Muslims. Why do I say if we consider the Shia to be Muslims?
Revelation after
Because no matter how diplomatic we try to be, what they believe is directly, opposed to what it is we believe. I'll give you one clear example of that. We believe that only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has knowledge of the unseen. But they believe that their 12 Imams possess such knowledge. We believe that revelation stopped after the death of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam died. They believe that their 12 Imams continue to receive inspiration, revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They believe that the Imam has a status higher than the status of prophethood. They also believe, which they deny whenever the opportunity comes, that the Quran has been corrupted and tampered with. Why do they believe that? Because it feeds into two things. The first thing that it feeds is this idea that the Quran contained ayat that explicitly mentioned Ali as the Prophet's successor. And the second thing it feeds into is the accusation that the Sahaba are out of the fold of Islam. So if you say that they were the ones responsible for tampering with the Quran and distorting it and removing ayat from it, then that is evidence that indeed the companions of the Prophet ﷺ were disbelievers. So it serves a dual purpose. But when you speak to them, they deny it. They say that that was a fringe movement inside of the Shia school. It's completely isolated. It's one or two scholars. It's not what we believe. But it is a tactic. Also understand that taqiyya is an extremely important part of Shia belief. What is taqiyya? The word taqiyya comes from the word tuqa, or the word for barrier. So basically you are lying to protect yourself. That's what taqiyya is. It is lying with the purpose of protecting oneself, safeguarding oneself. So if you know that you travel to a country and there's a gang of criminals hunting Muslims, and they stop you on the street and they ask you, are you a Muslim? You are allowed to say no. No, I'm not a Muslim. You're allowed to do that. That's taqiyya. Right? That's legitimate, permissible taqiyya. But what is not permissible is for you to lie as and whenever it suits your agenda. Does it make sense? So in the first case, it's a matter of necessity. It is a darura. There's a dire need to lie. You want to protect yourself, you want to protect your life or the life of your loved ones. But their understanding of taqiyya is that you may lie whenever you need to. If it's politically expedient, if you wish to protect yourself from actually admitting to something that others would find completely unacceptable, like the belief that the Quran has been distorted. I've heard a Kuwaiti Shi'i scholar say in a YouTube lecture that Allah had revealed in the Quran. Let's listen to the ayah as it has been revealed. يا أيها الرسول بلغ ما أنزل إليك من ربك وإن لم تفعل فما بلغت رسالته. O messenger, convey what has been revealed to you, and if you do not do so, then you have not conveyed the message that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you. This sheikh, this is a video, right? This is not me listening to an audio or reading it in a book. He says the ayah had the words, O Prophet, O Messenger, convey what has been revealed to you from Allah concerning Ali. The words fi aliyin were removed by the Sahaba. Now a person who makes a claim like that, is it easy to say that he remains a Muslim? This is my question to you. Because what he is now claiming is that the Quran that we have with us today has been tampered with. So it is a serious matter. And for even Sheikh Yusuf Qardawi, just as a side point, because I might become a bit too emotional about this issue. So I'll give you the experience of a man who for decades was at the forefront of creating understanding and brotherhood and unity between the Sunnis and the Shi'is. But after the Syrian civil war, Sheikh Yusuf al-Qardawi has changed his entire stance on this matter. Because I've heard him in a video lecture as well. He says that I now realize that the Saudi position all these years was the correct one. The ulama of Saudi Arabia and others, of course, not just Saudi Arabia, they told him that what you are doing, you do not know them, you do not understand them, you don't really appreciate the issue. Because he was like, no, we Muslims and we need unity in the Muslim, that kind of approach, which is commendable as well. But the other ulama were telling him is, you don't know them. You don't know what the reality of their beliefs are. And then now he knows, and he's seen it, with the Iranians sending forces into Syria to fight on behalf of Bashar Assad, and Hezbollah sending forces into Syria to also support the Syrian regime. He has now seen that it has all just been a farce. All this talk of unity, all this talk of one ummah, all this talk of creating, just one Islamic community, it's all absolute nonsense. Whenever the opportunity is available to further their own interest and to spread their da'wah and to invite people to Shi'ism, then that opportunity is taken. Anyway, the reason why we're actually talking about this is that at the Battle of Chaldiran, the Ottomans, Salim the First, he basically destroys the Safavid army, and this border region, if I can go back here, this border region here, this is the end of Safavid sort of power in this area in Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and this part of Anatolia. All right. So he smashes the Safavids, and they lose control over all of those things. In fact, he even takes their city in Tabriz, and he's going to move further, but then other things get his attention, and he takes the army back towards Turkey. Right. So who knows if that didn't happen? Again, alternative history. Allah knows best. If he had continued, on that path, then the Safavid Empire would not have lasted until 1736, but it would have probably been over in that early period before 1520. But Allah knows best. I don't like to speculate on this, and I just focus on the actual history. All right. So we were talking about this. Right? This was their capital. They moved their capital from here to Isfahan. In fact, most of those beautiful cities, if you type in Isfahan right now in Google, you will see the palaces of the Safavid sultans. They were known, here's something else, that latest sultans of the Uthmani, like the Abbasids, they became known for luxury and for the harem and for drinking. Many books have been written about the Safavids and their love for opium. All right, that was also, yes, opium's been available for hundreds of years. It's not a new thing. Right? Heroin and its derivatives, or opium and its derivatives, have been around for quite some time. Okay? Anyway. Allah musta'an. Yes, we will make some progress, inshallah. All right. Just a quick, I want to talk about this also. Obviously, we know that in 1517 he defeats the Mamluks. This is Salim the First, and that's the end of the Mamluks in Syria, in the Hijaz, and also in Egypt. All right. This is what we would call a Kizilbash. A Kizilbash is one of those Basically, I don't want to say they are the equivalent of the Janissaries, which I'll talk about now very soon, inshallah, since we are running out of time. But they were like the fiercest warriors in the Safavid Empire. All right. So this is a Kizilbash. This is what they look like. This is a Ottoman soldier, and they were known for these red little things here. In fact, that's what Kizilbash means, like little red hood. All right. I don't know if it's a Persian or a Turkish word. I need to double check. But that's Kizilbash. That's why they were called Kizilbash, because of that little red cap at the top of their turbans. All right. Yeah, this is something we discussed already. Now, all right. I just finished this book last week. Brilliant overview. If you just want a nice introduction to the Ottoman Empire, nice overview of 600 and odd years, this is a very good book, alhamdulillah. She specializes in Ottoman history. I'm not sure if she's American or British. She speaks Ottoman Turkish and she can read. She's one of those true historians, you know, someone who's actually able to go to the archives and read in the original languages. That's what a historian does. What I'm doing tonight is just taking information from books and presenting it here. So, you know, that's the difference between a historian is the person who's going to go to the archives, is going to look at inscriptions and translate them and read them and so on and so forth. And the next book I want you to read, which is very good, is a book called Islamic Gunpowder Empires. It's again a brilliant overview of the Ottomans, the Safavids, and also the Mughals. I used this book last year when I was developing information for the foundations of Islamic civilization. All right? And by the way, the reason why it's called the Islamic Gunpowder Empires is because the Ottomans, the Safavids, and the Mughals, they were all known for the use of cannons and muskets. All right, so they were the first Muslim empires that used those extensively. So to use cannon and muskets, and then start to phase out all the other different parts of the army. Another book that is very important, and this is an amazing book, although his bias towards Islam is very apparent in his writing against Islam and also against the Turks. But nevertheless, one of the people that I've been listening to, a Muslim scholar, he said that he read the book and he thought that it had very important information and discussions that you will not find anywhere else. Now let's talk about the controversial stuff. The first thing we want to talk about is slavery. We'll talk about it in two ways. The slave trade, and then we'll talk about the Janissaries, because ultimately they were slaves, and then we'll talk about the concubines in the harem. The word harem comes from the Arabic word harim. And the word harim today, if you use it today, when you're speaking like in Saudi Arabia, it's a colloquial word that refers to my wife and my daughters. The word harim, if a man says, you know, harim haggi, then he means my wife, my daughters, my granddaughters, etc. He's talking about the female members of his household. That's what the word harem actually means. It doesn't mean a place where a Muslim sultan goes and he can have sex with 200 women. You know, that's the image that you know, Western historians have given us. So that's the first thing. The word harem comes from the Arabic word harim, which refers to the female members of your household. So let's talk about slavery. We have to move away from this understanding that slavery is what we read about or what we see on television when we talk about the transatlantic slave trade. All right? The main source of slaves in Islam are captives during warfare. The main source of slaves are people that are taken prisoner, that are captured, whether they be soldiers or whether they be women and children from those captured lands after battles and after warfare. So those people automatically become slaves. They, from a certain perspective, they resemble property. But in terms of their rights and the responsibilities of those who own them, then they are like people. Let me explain what this means. It means that I own this person, I'm allowed to sell this person, but I'm not allowed to treat this person like other property, like an animal, as an example. The Prophet ﷺ said, if Allah has made you responsible for your servants / slaves, if you should feed them from what you consume, for what you eat, and you should clothe them from what you wear, and if you order any one of them to do difficult work, you should assist him with it. So let me ask you, that hadith, do you understand from it that Islam allows the mistreatment of slaves? Also write this down because it's important. There is no how shall we phrase it? Just give me a second. Let me find the most succinct way of putting it. There is no encouragement in Islamic texts for taking slaves. There is no encouragement in Islamic texts for taking slaves. But there is ample encouragement for freeing them and treating them well. There is no command in the Quran or in the Sunnah that we as Muslims should take people as slaves. No encouragement. The slave trade or slavery, however you wish to define it, there is no encouragement in Islam to do so. But there is ample evidence for the freeing of slaves and also for their just and good treatment. Alright, so that's the second thing. The next thing we want to talk about, so we
What's the reality of how they were treated?
they were treated well.
All of them?
If there were, let's say there were 100 grand viziers in 600 years, almost all of them were slaves. Every black eunuch, some of these black and white eunuchs, they were some of the wealthiest people in the empire, but they were technically slaves. Most of the concubines who were the mothers of future sultans, they were concubines, but not absolute power, but they were wealthy and they were well taken care of. Alright? Then let's talk about the Janissaries, because that's going to allow me to discuss something and also answer your question. The Janissary comes from the Turkish word Yana Shiri, which means new soldier. Yeah? Yani Shiri. So that became Janissary and the Arabs have done worse than the Westerners. The Westerners, it still sounds like the original Turkish. In Arabic, it's Al-Inkishariya. It sounds nothing like the Turkish. But anyway, these were young Christian boys that were taken from the Balkan areas, specifically from places like Bosnia and Albania and Macedonia. Okay? They were taken between the ages of 7 and 14 or 15. One child per household, and they were taken every 4 to 5 years. So every 4 to 5 years, someone would go into the villages of Albania and Bosnia and Croatia and these areas, and the Albanians were the prized ones, especially the Albanians from the mountain villages. Why? Because they were strong. They were, powerful boys. They were physically, they were just physically different from everyone else. And this is also one of the reasons why the Albanians feature heavily amongst the generals and admirals in the Ottoman Empire, right? Because they were able to work themselves up through the Janissary Corps up to that level of authority. But anyway, so these boys would be taken. If you were the only boy, then the rule was that you cannot be taken. If your mother or father was elderly, you could not be taken, because since you are now responsible for taking care of them. So there were a lot of rules that are not included in this discussion, which I always find disturbing. Because yes, these boys were being separated from their parents. Yes, they were technically slaves. Okay? But did you know that the Bosnians, even after they became Muslims, they still wanted the Sultan to guarantee that they were still eligible for the Devshirmi. The Devshirmi. I hope I'm pronouncing it properly. This is how you spell it. Dev Shir Mi. It's like a body tax, like a people tax. Like people are taken instead of cattle and grain and gold and silver. So the Bosnians, they converted to Islam, but they wanted the Sultan to guarantee that their children would still be eligible for the corps, that they could still be used. And also the generosity, these soldiers or these boys were meant to carry out two functions in the empire. If you read this book that's on the screen right now, you'll get all of this info, mashallah. This book is packed with amazing information. So he lays out all the rules at the beginning in the first or second chapter. Like, you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that. Like instructions that the administrators were given. Because the last thing they wanted was for this, and this is important. There was never a single revolt against the Ottomans because of this. I'll say that again. There were other things that the Albanians and the Serbs and others, could use as a reason to revolt and rebel against the Ottomans. They did not use this body tax as a reason for that, which tells us something, because these boys were taken from poor villages. They were taken to Istanbul. They were fed, they were trained, they were educated. Yes, they were circumcised and they became Muslims. But that is a future that would not have been given to them had they remained in the Balkans. Does it make sense?
So they were given willingly?
No, I'm sure if you were a mother or a father, if someone comes, if the Malaysian government comes to your home tomorrow morning to say that we're taking one of your sons for the military, they say there's a war and there's what's it called? Conscription, right? Would you just pack his bag for him and ask him to leave? It would have been difficult. Now imagine that you have no choice. And if you refuse, then you have to face a penalty for that as well. Anyway, so the generals, they were taken to Istanbul. They went through a period of training. It was very long. It was anywhere between 10 to 15 years, right? And they were retired at about 40. So they were taken as young boys. You spend that entire time. You're not allowed to get married while you are in the corps. But after that, you can go back to civilian life. And then basically, so a lot of this slavery issue was just a technicality, because for the most part, these people lived lives as free men, as we would understand it. Not that they were on a chain and they were being beaten like animals, like we saw, or we know happened in America. People all shackled together and forced to work on plantations and things like that. So this is something that we need to understand. Also, a lot of the janissaries would become like part of the council. They would reach the level of being the Grand Vizier. So this was all part of that of that system. It wasn't as simple as saying these boys were taken and they were just what's the word? Abused, oppressed. Lots of people understood that this was necessary. And the reason now, let's get back to the reason. This was happening during the time of Murad the first, all right, the third Sultan. And basically the reason why he did this was because he was becoming wary of his Turkish allies. So he wanted to develop an army that was absolutely loyal to him. And so this is where that idea started, and he started recruiting these young boys from there. And then as the years go by, as with every process, it just becomes a bit more streamlined and technical and bureaucratic. All right. This is what they look like. This is what they would wear on their heads. This little white thing at the back here, because the first of them were brought to a Sufi sheikh from the Bakhtishi Sufi order. And he put his sleeve over their heads so that it hung over the back of their heads. So from that point onwards, the Janissaries would wear headgear that had that flap that extended behind their heads and between their shoulders. You understand? So when they were finally abolished in 1826, the Janissary Corps, the Bakhtashi order was also closed down. like where they had lodges and zawiyas and things like that. But you can read all about that in the book. Because I know you want to read. I know that as soon as you leave here, you're going to download the book, you're going to make yourself a cup of tea, you're going to just spend the whole night, and then at 4, you're going to go and take wudu, pray tahajjud, pray fajr, and then get some sleep. I know that's going to happen. Alright, this is the book that I'm reading now. It's called The Ottoman Empire and the World Around It, but she only covers about 250 years. But so far, alhamdulillah, it's been really interesting. She's more focused on things like financial, commercial, political, movements. It's more academic than the book that I showed you earlier. Again, not a lot of books, or I have not found a single book in English written by a Muslim about the Ottomans. If there is, please. I saw you had that book, The Crusades. I have things to say about that book, but I won't say it now. I bought another one of his, and no, I didn't buy it. I downloaded it, and it's about Islamophobia throughout history. Because he's not a historian, his narrative is very disjointed. Like it's here and it's there. It's like you're reading a patchwork, Like there isn't like a nice, like a flow. And that's what I like to read when I'm reading history. But the book was also beneficial. Right, now I actually have about 23 reasons, but because it's already 10, or it's after 10, let's just go through some of them. Alright? So, number 1, from the 18th century onwards, so the 1700s, we started adopting foreign legal systems. The Sharia was being replaced, it was being substituted, it was being undermined. And that obviously is going to be a reason for the downfall of the Ummah. One of the practical ways that that's going to manifest itself is in terms of the application of justice and equality and legal and just having legal coherence. Because the Sharia is obviously superior to any other legal system, isn't it? It's better, it's much better. Like, just think about inheritance as an example. Whatever people think about it, if you really study it and you immerse yourself in it, then you are amazed at how perfect the system is. Why is it perfect? Because it's divine. It is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed in the Quran and taught, through the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How can it not be? It is not the product of human reasoning. It's not based on our opinions, because you and I are going to fail. Alright, the next thing we want to talk about, it was an empire of conquest, of war. Right? Of military conquest. It was not an empire of da'wah. So there were 3 things that you're going to see was very apparent if you read Ottoman history. Number 1, there was not an active campaign to convert people to Islam. We're not talking about forced conversion, although Salim I tried to do that, and he was shot down by the Shaykh al-Islam. He wanted people to convert to Islam by the sword, and the Shaykh said that is haram. But there was no system of, let's send people to those villages, let them learn Greek, let them learn Serbian and Croatian and Bulgarian, let them give da'wah to those people, let them translate the Quran for them, let them teach them the Sunnah, show them the beauty of Islam, invite them to it. This didn't happen. Alright? The second thing is that the Ottomans developed a system of, not arrogance, not a system, but they presented themselves as arrogant. We are better than you. We are superior to you. And of course, if you tell people and you show that to them in your actions and in your words, then people are not going to be attracted to your faith. And the last thing is oppression. And I'll just mention the different kinds of oppression. Number 1 would be exorbitant taxation. The second would be arbitrary military action. The third would be a violation of some of those what's the word? Some of those provisions of the Janissary, the Devshirma, where they were taking those boys. Sometimes they would break those rules, and obviously that was going to cause resentment amongst the people. Okay? Then, number 3, we see that the provincial rulers and ruling families, they begin to assert themselves more dominantly. The best example of this is Muhammad Ali Pasha. He was Greek Albanian, and He was sent with the Ottoman army with the British to expel the French from Egypt. The French general at the time was Napoleon Bonaparte. And when did this happen? As for the person who can tell me. 1798. Right, 1798 to 801. This is when the French were occupying Egypt, and this is when the Ottomans and the British allied with one another to expel the French from Egypt. Right. Anyway, once he got there, he was not Muhammad Ali Pasha was not in command. Someone else was in command. After the French were expelled, that commander died, and then he became the commander. He then established for himself a governorship over Egypt, and then he established for himself Egypt as a separate or semi-autonomous province in the Ottoman Empire. Also, Muhammad Ali Pasha and his son Ibrahim Pasha, they are the commanders that the Ottoman Sultan sent against the first Saudi kingdom, the so-called Wahhabis. Okay? So this is all happening during that time, the early 19th century. This is when the Sultan sends to Muhammad Ali Pasha. But what's ironic about that is amazing. Anyway, so the Sultan in Istanbul, he sends to Muhammad Ali Pasha, he says, I want you to take care of this rebellion that's happening in the Arabian Peninsula. He sends his son, Ibrahim Pasha, he crosses the Red Sea with the army, or they go through the Sinai Peninsula, not sure what the route they took. They get there and they start heading towards Makkah, Medina, and then finally they are able to defeat the Saudis outside of the city of Dir'iyah, which is on the outskirts of Riyadh today. Alright, what's funny is that in the next few years, Muhammad Ali Pasha and his son will lead an army conquering Anatolia on its way to Istanbul. So do you understand why I think this is ironic? Anyway, it's a long story. It's fine. Let's just go back to my original point, because I just realized now that my understanding of the irony is because of my understanding of some other issue, and unless I explain that issue, I cannot connect the dots. I cannot connect the dots for you. No, but what? Okay, let me try at least. Okay, very briefly. Muhammad Ali Pasha is establishing himself as an independent ruler. He basically wants Egypt to be separate from the Ottoman Empire, right? So he basically says, oh, I'm here, I support you, but he's doing his own thing, right? No, I'm part of you, I'm with you guys, but he's doing his own thing, right? So that's what's happening. So the Sultan says to him, send an army to Makkah and Medina and Riyadh and these areas and take care of this Wahhabi problem. So he does that, and they're successful. The Wahhabi Saudi family is sent to Istanbul. They are executed there, and that's the end of the first Saudi kingdom, right? It's going to re-emerge a few decades later, but that's the first Saudi kingdom. So what I find ironic is that people who say that the Saudis rebelled against the Ottomans, right, by establishing their own independent state, is that the people that were sent to deal with them when they rebelled, they themselves rebelled against the Ottomans a few years later. So much so that the Ottomans thought that was the end. That this is, halas, Muhammad Ali and his army, they are going to conquer Istanbul, and this will be the end of it, and Muhammad Ali Pasha will establish his own kingdom. But then that didn't happen because the Russians got involved. They sent an army across the Black Sea, that they entered Anatolia, and Muhammad Ali Pasha had to retreat, and he came back all the way into Egypt, and he established himself in Egypt. Also make a note of this, and this is not on my list, but the Ottomans, one of their main problems when it comes to rebellions, is that one of their policies was pardon, which they applied in the most ridiculous and liberal way possible. Let me give you an example. Fakhruddin al-Ma'ni was a Druze. A Druze is like a a sect that left Islam a long time ago, right? So they've got all the mixture of lots of different things, but they are not Muslims. So they are in Lebanon. So the governor of Lebanon is a Druze, Fakhruddin. He rebels against the Ottomans. He loses, they forgive him. He rebels against the Ottomans. He loses, they forgive him. Right? They pardon him. They even give him other leadership positions. He rebels against the Ottomans the third time. That's when they decide to kill him. They did this numerous times, and it cost dearly every single time. Even Abdul Hamid II, he could have dealt with all of those groups that were plotting against him before he was deposed. He's like, no, inshallah, let's forgive, and he was not very decisive when he needed to be. All right. So their failure to deal decisively with the rebels, and the other issue that I was going to mention in relation to that was, I forget now. It's that time of the night. What was it? Anyway, if I remember, I'll tell you, inshallah. Another reason that they, for the decline of the empire, was the spread of Sufism. And not just any kind of Sufism, not just people gathering to, remember Allah in congregation. These were extremely heretical Sufi groups with some extreme beliefs about Allah and about the nature of the universe and about prophethood and revelation, So that caused a lot of people to be attracted to that, and a lot of people to be misguided in their understanding of Islam. And as we will see with the most modern kinds of Sufism, it leads to a very skewed understanding of the role of Islam in daily life, particularly in politics. Right? So the Sufis have been co-opted in a lot of Muslim countries to support the regime. Basically, don't rebel, don't speak ill of the government, like the Saudis have done with many of their ulama. Right? So there's this particular group of people that have been supported since the Gulf War to basically propagate the idea that any rebellion or any protest against a Muslim ruler is absolutely haram. It's not permissible. If you do it, you have threatened your Islam. And so the Saudis have been supporting that group of people. Right? So you'll find that Sisi is going to use that same group of ulama, and other rulers are going to do the same. Anyway, where were we? We move on to the wars on multiple fronts. Just before the last 200 years, they are fighting in Europe. They are fighting in Africa, Northern Africa, against the Spaniards and the Italians and the Venetians. They are fighting against the Safavids. They're fighting against the Russians. They're fighting against the Cossacks. They are fighting everywhere. And as you know, war is extremely expensive. And if you are taking people from farms to enroll them in the army, that means that fields don't get work. That means that, number one, there's not enough food to feed people, which leads to famine. And number two, it leads to people taking other ways of earning a living, like armed robbery and piracy, etc. It also means that there's less money available or less produce for you to tax. So it has all these ripple effects. So fighting all of these wars definitely weakened, the empire. And from the 17th century onwards, the Ottomans are constantly going to enter into negotiations, peace negotiations, where a chunk of the empire has to be negotiated away to secure peace. And then the next war happens, and they have to make peace. So, okay, you guys can have that now. And then another war happens, and then by World War I, what are we left with? Because if you know the story of World War I, the reason, Archduke Ferdinand, where's he killed? Sarajevo. Where's Sarajevo? In Bosnia. Didn't I tell you that Bosnia was part of the Ottoman Empire? What is the crown prince of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire doing parading in Sarajevo? Because before that, a few decades before that, the Ottomans had signed over Bosnia to the Austro-Hungarians. So that's why he's there. Yes?
Not that related, but you know how the Ottomans were took Aceh as a protected state? How was the Ottoman viewed by the Islamic world at the time? And give you any sort of responsibility to protect and help the Islamic.
So how much time do we have? Ya salam. Okay. Whew. Ya salam. That's a big question. All right, so let's just start with agreement. So even though we said a lot of those provincial governors in Egypt or North Africa and other places, they were starting to assert themselves and become more and more, recognized that the Sultan was the Sultan. They still recognized they still recognized Istanbul as being the center of the Muslim world. They still recognized that to be the seat of main power. But they were trying their level best to have that. As far away as India and here in Malaysia or Southeast Asia, like the Philippines and what was the Kingdom of Cham, etc., you find that all of these different sultanates here in Southeast Asia and also the Sultanate of Zanzibar and all these different places, they still recognized him as the Khalifa. He had no political control over them. But in terms of just his stature and his, there's a word that I can't, what's the word? Not stature, something close to stature. Not ceremonial. That's all words we can use. But his position in the minds of Muslims, even in South Africa, the Muslims of South Africa considered him to be the Khalifa. And he and the Sultan would send religious envoys to Cape Town, to find out about the affairs of the Muslims in Cape Town. All of this was happening at the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century. That's why we have Muslim, again, lots to talk about here, but we have Muslim families in South Africa. Their surnames are Effendi. They are directly related to the Shaykh al-Islam and the Muftis that came from the Ottoman Empire to Cape Town on official visits. Alright? In fact, my neighbor growing up was an Effendi, and if you see them, they are light skinned, tall, and they have blue eyes as well. And Effendi is a common surname throughout Ottoman history for the Shaykh al-Islams. It's almost like the Basha title, right? Something similar. So Effendi, very common in South Africa or Cape Town to be exact. So yes, they had that prestige, they had that status and stature in the Muslim world. It didn't directly translate into political power, but it was definitely they are the Khalifa. Now obviously, there were those who felt differently, like the Shia Safavids. They didn't consider him to be a Khalifa, they considered him to be an imposter. They considered that they were the ones who had the true right. Who else didn't agree with them? The Mughal emperors in a later stage, they tried to establish themselves as being the protectors of Makkah and Medina. So they were starting to spend more money in Makkah and Medina. These are the emperors that the Muslim Indian Empire in India. So they tried to establish themselves in Makkah and Medina. Why is Makkah and Medina so important? Why do you need all of that? Because these are the two holiest sites. If you control that. The Saudis, perfect example. Until recently, most Muslims had a favorable opinion of the Saudi government. Am I right? The King of Saudi Arabia was Khadimul Haramain Sharifain, the custodian of the two holy mosques. He was amazing, he's spending so much money, etc., etc. Obviously, the veil has been lifted in the last 10 or 15 years. But if you're looking for a comparison, which is fairly recent, that must have been what Muslims living outside of the Ottoman Empire thought about the Sultan, the Khalifa in Istanbul. Right? Allah knows best. Any other questions? Yes, we're still moving on. Then the next thing we want to talk about is foreign interventions. And here we mean direct military, invasion. Like I told you, they went to war with the Russians 6 or 7 times. These were wars fought directly against one another, no proxies, meeting on the battlefield, etc. Also, there were all these other states, the Habsburgs. They were also the Italians, specifically the Venetians. They were also at war with the Spanish in the Mediterranean. So they were fighting. These people were getting involved, and not only militarily, but also espionage, also financial and commercial sort of blackmail and sabotage. All of these things were happening, from without. In the 19th century, the main way that they intervened before the end of the empire was through the number of loans which they had given the Ottomans, which the Ottomans were unable to pay back. The riba trap, the Ottoman Empire for the first few hundred years had always prided itself on the fact that it was able to raise revenue internally. The idea that they were going to borrow from the French or others was a very, very difficult decision for them to make. But when they made it, that was the beginning of the end, as many Muslim countries now know today. Okay, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Malaysia, Indonesia. Is there any Muslim country that has no sovereign debt? Brunei? I don't know. But it's very rare. It's very, very rare in our times that there's a Muslim country. How many Muslim countries are there in the IOC? The Islamic organization, what is it called? Organization, OIC, Organization of Islamic Countries. 57? Do some Googling. Alright, the last thing I'm going to talk about is the Armenian genocide. This is a very, very controversial issue. There's now Germany and America and other places, they've recognized that what happened during World War I was a genocide, where hundreds of thousands, if not more than 1 million Armenians were killed by the Ottoman army. So the Ottomans deny this, or at least the Turkish government denies this. It wasn't a genocide. It wasn't the systematic eradication of a different ethnic group. They say that those people who died, they died because of illness, exhaustion, hunger. They died because they were rebelling against the Turkish army. So they were treated as terrorists, and so many different interpretations. What we do know is that a large number of people died. The circumstances behind their death it's like now it's 2020. This happened in 1914, 1915, 1916, and we are still debating this issue. That shows you that how sensitive it is. But definitely thousands of Armenians were killed unjustly during this period. There's no doubt. There's no doubt. But did it amount to a systematic genocide? That is the debate, and that debate rages on. Okay? So ultimately, here's the real question. Was there a directive from the highest level of Ottoman government to the soldiers on the ground that Armenians were to be targeted and eradicated? Ultimately, that is the question. No such evidence exists. There were directives for harsh treatment, but unless they got rid of the files, they burnt that part of the archive. That's the debate now. But there is nothing. There is no real smoking gun. There's just a lot of fire, a lot of smoke, burnt remains. But we don't know whether or not the Ottoman government actually ordered the summary execution of hundreds of thousands of Armenians. That's Allah knows best. You will read evidence on both sides, but ultimately, I'm going to mention the question again, because if you don't have an answer to this question, then it's going to remain an open question. Was there a directive from the highest levels of Ottoman government for the systematic eradication of the Armenian people? Question mark. Every aspect of the conversation must answer that question. If it doesn't, then it's a pointless debate. Then you can't say it was a genocide, and you can't say it wasn't a genocide. Then you only have to deal with the actual reality that hundreds of thousands of Armenians were killed. They did die. How did they die? Where did they die? Who killed them? What were the circumstances? What were the possible, was there justification for certain killings? Long debate. But my question remains. All right, there's a lot of other things that we could speak about. It's too late now to talk about Kemal Ataturk.
Can you just summarize?
Summarize? What? Kemal Ataturk?
Yeah.
But he's not part of the Ottoman story. Not really. Oh, I didn't speak about the harem? Oh yes, okay, so the harem basically, it is the prerogative of a Muslim man to have 4 wives and a number of concubines. And there's no limit on the number of concubines that he might possess. Alright? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, إلا على أزواجهم أو ما ملكت أيمانهم. And as for those who safeguard their private parts, then except with their wives and with what their right hand possesses, which is a reference to a concubine, a slave girl that you own. And there are a number of conditions. One of them is that it is not permissible to forcefully have sex with a concubine, that if a man was to do so, he would be punished. So rape is not permissible. The other issue is also that most of these women would be taken as part of the war booty, right? But let's be honest, there was a flourishing slave trade in women that were not directly taken by the Muslims. So even in the times of the Umayyad and also the Abbasids, women from Russia and other places, they were being captured and they were being brought by slave traders into the Muslim world. Okay, so that's a long discussion. I recommend though, for a better and a more in-depth discussion of this issue, whether it's the concubine issue or slavery in general, there's a very good series of articles on Yaqeen Institute's app or on the website. Right, Yaqeen Institute has a good discussion on this issue. But ultimately, like I said earlier, that is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made permissible for a Muslim man. You and I are going to debate it. We don't feel comfortable with it. We're not practicing it. No one's doing it now. All of those things come into play. The other issue is that all of those women had rights over that man, whether he had sexual relations with them or not. Alright? So, all of those rights that we discussed earlier. The other issue that we want to talk about. What do we want to talk about?
Killing of
fratricide. Yes. I forget the Ottoman Turkish word for that. But basically, that was instituted by Muhammad II, the Al-Fatih. He is the one who made it law. Right? So basically, he wanted his successors to execute their brothers when they come to power, so that there would not be a repeat of what happened between 1402 and 1415, where there were 3 or more, rivals to the throne, and they were killing one another to achieve power. So there was one of the sultans, I forget his name now, but he killed his father and he killed 19 of his brothers, so that there would be no. Is it halal? No, it's haram. And the ulama of the time, lots of ulama condemned it. This is one of those examples where the person that has ultimate authority will make a decision whether the people are kicking and screaming. It doesn't matter to him. Think about all the things that have been happening around the Muslim world in the last 10 years. People kicking and screaming, begging for change. Egypt is a perfect example. Why did Sisi and the army have to interfere with a democratically elected? They felt that because they were the army and they had their own agenda, they took matters into their own hands. No matter what the foreign governments of the world said, or the UN, or what the Sharia says, they don't care about things like that. So, killing his brothers. You also have to understand, like I was telling you last night or the night before, because of what happened, because of the bloodshed, because of that anxiety that it could happen again, they thought pragmatically, if I have to kill 20 people to save 20,000 people, then I'm going to kill 20 people. So whether you agree with that, we can definitely say that the Sharia does not allow that kind of logic. But you didn't make that decision. And I don't even know how I vaguely remember reading about this, but that one of the sultans, like, he didn't want to do it, like he cried when it was being done. But it needed to be done according to the law of the Ottomans. But that's that's my brother. You know? So it wasn't just like this, this completely, cold-blooded, bloodthirsty practice. Sounds like it. Definitely is. But did they think of it like that? From the same perspective that you and I? One of the biggest mistakes we make as students of history is we view those events through our own lenses, our own experiences, our own ideals and beliefs. And that's one of the biggest mistakes we make, because it blinds us to really seeing things from a different reality. There's a really good course online. It's called The Other Side of History. And it's a discussion of just different snapshots of history and different people, but it's called The Other Side of History because it covers history from the perspective of the peasants, not from the perspective of what we call big man history, sultans and kings and and emperors. So I found it really interesting. Did you know the average age for marriage in ancient Egypt was 14? I didn't know that. Did you know what peasants ate along the Nile? Did you know that many peasants in ancient Egypt were killed by hippopotami? Did you know that water birds were the main source of meat in ancient Egypt for peasants? Didn't know these things. Did you know the main medical ailment in ancient Egypt was dental? Because of the coarseness of the bread and food which they ate, causing multiple cavities and fractures of teeth. Just didn't know these things. It's fascinating. Allah musta'an. Anyway, I digress, as usual. Kemal Atatürk grew up in what is today basically part of Greece. His mother wanted him to become a sheikh, and that's not what happened, of course. He joined the military academies. He rose through the ranks. He was the first in his class there. He was an absolutely brilliant general, first soldier, no doubt. He was in the officer corps. He was a great soldier, great tactician. There's no doubt about that. Whatever he did after he became president of Turkey, that's a different story. But the man's early life, in terms of military affairs, he had two things going for him. He was extremely intelligent, and number two, he was very brave. And then you can add to that the fact that he was able to inspire loyalty in his troops, and he was also a great tactician. So he had all of these things going for him, right? Now at the time, we didn't get to talk about the CUP or the CPU. This is basically a congress that was started, people that wanted progress, and they wanted things to change in the Ottoman Empire. He wasn't one of the founders or one of the main people involved there, but during World War I and after World War I, he became a prominent figure amongst them. But then, after World War I, the Greeks invade Anatolia, and he leads the resistance against the Greeks. When the Greeks are expelled, so by 1922, the Greeks are expelled, Kemal Atatürk is at the highest level of popularity, right? And he has placed himself in a position of complete authority. So that in 1922, he abolishes the Sultanate, and in 1924, he abolishes the Caliphate. Then that is when the modern state of Turkey is established. That is Kemal Atatürk. I know that's over summarized. Early life, he was in Libya, he was in Greece, he was also in Syria. He came back he was in Istanbul. He was part of the garrisons in the Gallipoli during the First World War. There's lots of things to talk about, but what I do want to mention is that once he becomes the president and he has complete control over all of the facets of the government, he abolishes the Sharia, right? When I say the Sharia, I mean the implementation of Sharia law. So let's put it that way. He calls for the closing of religious schools. He changes the Arabic script of Ottoman Turkish. So he does two things with the language. Number one, he changes the script from Arabic into Latin letters. Number two, he starts a campaign of removing all the Persian and Arabic words from Turkish and replacing them with like original Turkish words or words from European languages. All right. He also, what else has he done? The first few years of his presidency, he also translates as the adhan translated into Turkish. You can go online and listen to the adhan in Turkish. Right? There's an audio where, so yeah, now the adhan has to be done in Turkish too. The issue of hijab. There was a picture that I put here, but now it's gone. He's walking in Istanbul with his wife, but she's in hijab. Even though he's trying to get women to remove the hijab. Why is his wife wearing the hijab? Because at this time, the people are not yet ready for something like that. Do you know what I mean? Like that's just too much. It's too much, too quick. So slowly but surely, and as if you've ever been to Turkey, you know that there's a lot of women that wear hijab, but there's also a lot of women that don't wear. But 50 years ago, it was worse, because that's when Turkey was at the height of its sort of secularism. It's only in the last few decades that things have slowly been moving in a different direction, and that's also part of that history. But Kemal Ataturk, his main vision was the complete separation of Muslims or Turks or Turkish citizens from Islam and the Ottoman history. Let's just summarize it. That was his agenda. That removing people from the deen and removing them from the history of the Ottomans. So lots of things were changed, and that's just part of it. He was a dictator. There's no doubt about that. In fact, at the council, at the parliamentary sitting where they were going to vote about the abolishment of the Sultanate and then later the Caliphate, he basically told his supporters, listen, when we get to that point of the discussion in Parliament, I want you all to pull out a pistol and put it on your desks in front of you, so that the people would understand the consequences of not voting for this resolution. And there were still, even when people saw that, there were still many people who still refused to vote, until he took out his own pistol and basically said, it's going to happen whether you like it or not. Democracy, huh? Beautiful, mashallah. We call the shotgun democracy. It's very powerful. There's a lot more to discuss, but I hope I've just inspired you. These series of lectures, if I've done only one thing since Monday, and that is to inspire you to read more and learn more, then I have fulfilled that objective, I hope. Right? If that's the only one, then I'm very happy. If I've done more, well, alhamdulillah. Anyway, definitely. Right. Barakallah wa barakatuh.